Hey everybody, welcome back to the weekly immigration news recap where we break down what changed in U.S. immigration this week and the week before that because we've been off for a couple of weeks around Thanksgiving, and what signals came from the Trump administration that could impact your immigration situation if you're a foreign national, or your client strategy if you're an immigration practitioner. Today is Thursday, December 4th. It's about 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This episode's going to be released tomorrow morning, Friday, December 5th. To recap the news of me today, I'm really lucky to be joined by Kevin Andrews, who's a longtime immigration attorney and founder of his newly launched solo practice. So Kevin, welcome. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you here. I've been loving your content, as I've told you off record before, that you've been posting on LinkedIn. And I'm really happy to have you to recap the news and talk a little bit deeper about some of the core topics that are impacting the immigration practitioner and immigration applicant community. But before we get into all that, can you just tell folks who are listening a little bit more about your professional background as an immigration attorney, your current practice, and then what types of clients you're supporting now?
Yeah, thanks, Finn. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your feedback about my content. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I've been practicing immigration law for 15 years now, and I've been in the immigration game, I guess, for 18 as a law clerk and paralegal. During that time I focused all on employment-based cases. Went through the ringer of working on perm and green card cases, H-1Bs, Ls, special weird cases, mandamus lawsuits, I-9 investigations, and FDNS and DOL investigations, which is great experience for today's conversation.
Certainly is. Yep.
And I started my own practice now of all times because of my growing obsession and concern about the way AI is impacting our industry, our economy, our civilization, and because it's such a general use technology. So my focus now is working with clients mainly in the EB1 and NIW and O1 space. I'm also working with a couple of other attorneys, including Brian Green and Prashant Dubey, who both have been honored to help or asked to join me with their litigation team, and that's focused right now, at least, a lot on EAD delays after the recent cancellation of auto renewals. And so, I think that's going to be one of these other pain points. It's going to start to where we see the ideological squeeze from government, and I just try to make sure I have a bird's eye view of what's going on, because I think, again, because of AI, that the rate of change, not just in the market, but the technology is accelerating ideological change. And that's why I'm so happy that you had asked me to come talk today, because I feel like it's not discussed enough. And I think of to the time of like when Edward Snowden leaks came out in 2013, and it was a global uproar. And we have now systems that are orders of magnitude more sophisticated, more sci-fi, that it feels like most people don't know about. So I really appreciate this platform to be able to talk about it some more.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into a lot of your original work research, what you've been digging into on that front when it relates to immigration. But first, we're gonna go through some of the big headlines that have happened over the last couple of weeks, because like any other week under this administration, in the immigration space, a lot of big things have happened all at once in a flood. So we'll go through that. We're going to focus primarily on what's happening inside of the Trump administration. Longtime listeners will know that Kevin, this is funny. I used to try to break it up between what happened inside the Trump administration, what was going on inside of Congress, and what was happening inside of the courts. The courts, when something big happens, are still relevant, but I rarely cover Congress anymore because what's the point? Except for the some of the political chatter that can have an
Whether they
impact.
can pass a bill, a budget or not, it
A
sounds doubtful.
shutdown that ends, DOL's ability to process perms and LCAs can be relevant, but other than that,
Right.
yeah. Sometimes somebody presents a big H-1B bill that's going to end the program, and then the next week they're out of Congress. So, what's I don't know if you followed that with Marjorie
I
Taylor
did,
Greene, but
yeah.
yeah, exactly. But anyways, so today on the docket, we're going to be, in terms of the headlines, we're going to talk about the fallout from the shooting of the two National Guardsmen in D.C. by an Afghan immigrant and all of the new USCIS and DHS reactionary policies. And then also we're going to talk about the news from yesterday on social media vetting for H-1B holders being expanded in consular processing, and then also Project Firewall, which Kevin has some really interesting insights on. And at the end, we're going to save some time for Kevin to, again, talk about some of the forward-looking under the radar things that are happening within the Trump administration that are probably already impacting all immigration practitioners, but certainly will be in force in the future. So with that, Kevin, are you ready to jump into the first headline?
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to kick things off with a little clip from USCIS Director Joseph Edlow, who spoke about some of the recent developments, that some of the recent policy changes that USCIS and DHS are implementing following that shooting that we discussed.
All right, Joseph Edlow is the director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and they handle a lot of this work, and they have a lot of mess to clean up from years past. And Joe, it's good to have you back on the show. We appreciate you coming on. Following the ambush of National Guard troops in Washington, you've announced at USCIS a full-scale reexamination of every green card for every alien from every country of concern. And you've also halted all asylum decisions until all can be vetted and screened to the maximum degree possible. I want to play just some of the president from last night. Take a listen.
Plenty of others.
How long does your administration plan to pause asylum into the U.S.?
I think a long time.
Can you give any
We
kind
don't
of time?
want. We don't want those people. We have enough problems. We don't want those people.
So that's the president right there. What's happening at USCIS? Is it a full moratorium on immigration?
Not a full moratorium on immigration. At this point, we are looking at what we have in our holdings, what checks we've been doing. And frankly, I have to tell you, Rob, we've updated our checks quite a bit since this individual was granted asylum and was interviewed back in March. But we are taking every precaution possible to prevent this from ever happening again. So I agree with the president. Things are going to be paused in a lot of ways for as long as necessary to make sure that we never see an atrocity like this occur on our homeland again.
So, Kevin, that sort of encapsulates, and I wanted to play it just so folks sort of get the sense of where the immigration leadership and the administration is at. But since Thanksgiving and since this that event happened, we've seen some other headlines come out from USCIS and from DHS. One was that Kristi Noem indicated, and it's been widely reported at this point, that the existing travel ban, entry ban is really what it is, for 19 countries is likely going to be expanded by at least 10 countries. We know that back in June, I think, the White House released a list of countries. So the State Department released a list of countries that they were considering to include in the travel ban. So that could come any moment now, right? That expanded travel/entry ban. The other is what we're talking about at the beginning here, that USCIS is going to put a hold on all pending asylum applications. They released this policy memo on December 2nd, sort of outlining the operations of this. And as always, for folks who are listening and watching, I'll put the link to this policy memo in the description so you can go and check it out yourself if you'd like. But this is one massive, right, ongoing policy development that we're still parsing out really what the ramifications are going to be, and like with any big policy development, like what the carve outs will be here as well. And then lastly, and this is what we were referring to on what you wrote about, USCIS implementing, right, a retroactive review of all active and previously approved green card holders from those countries of concern. And you wrote about that on LinkedIn. just yesterday as well, right? And so I wanted to give you the chance to break down that aspect of the recent development from DHS USCIS, but also the entire picture of how the Trump administration has been reacting to this shooting from a week and a half ago or so, and the massive policy ramifications that are coming from it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, in a lot of ways, I think it's a repeat of the first term when we were making America great again, but in a more sophisticated way. Um, Back then, it was more crude. It was, we can't let the Muslims in until I think it was like figure out just what the hell is going on. That was the policy. Now that we're making America great again, um, and we talked about like the Stephen Millers and the OPM guys who are structuring this in a way that is deploying essentially the same ideology. And something that I think has been true in my life, at least since 9/11, is that every crisis is an opportunity to push forward an ideology. And in our digitized and agentic world that we're living in, that's just scaling, that's just accelerating. And this isn't the first iteration of it in the first year of this administration. Uh, the Charlie Kirk assassination, very unfortunate incident, but the reaction and the First Amendment and Fourth Amendment implications to tracking people's social media and denying and revoking visas for expression of speech that's supposed to be protected is really chilling. And these things are happening so fast that it's just, I think psychologically it's hard to even feel the chilling effect because we're still reacting to the next thing in the cycle. As far as the breakdown, so the retroactive review, and again, this is not new. I believe Trump, the president, said we're gonna analyze all 55 million foreign national records of everybody here in the United States a few months ago, and that would have just sounded like typical political theatrics before these systems that are coming online that are deployed through things like Project Firewall. Um, so what is the population of review? So according to the American Immigration Council, the foreign-born residents that could be affected by this retroactive green card review is over 4 million people. And pre-AI, that scale would have probably been impractical, too expensive, and it's not anymore. There have been 720,000 green cards issued to nationals in the 19 countries from 21 to 24, this window of period for this re-review. And about half, a little more than half of those are citizens already and have lived here for a decade plus. And I, you know, I something I say to my clients often as a morbid assessment of the state of our world is that geography is destiny. And I was hoping we were moving to a place where that would not, be true. I'd like to have a immigration system that starts with what can you do, then where are you from, and this kind of thing is just a significant rollback. Now, I'm not naive. I understand that there are places in the world where the infrastructure to create bad actors is more robust in some areas than others. But I also know that the ability to parse and detect those people is more advanced and sophisticated now than ever before. And so to me, this is not about national security as much as it is about ideology and satisfying the nativists and the tension between the MAGA oligarchy and the MAGA nativists is more what this is about than anything that's so it's just to me it's just using people as pawns, and it's really unfortunate. And just real quick on the H-1B side. So H1 and H4. So this policy of opening your phones and making your profile data public was implemented in the summertime for students, FM and J. But now this is an expansion into H, and I see this incremental, like, do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I'm gonna announce the gold card the same day that we're announcing this other bad policy. Is all by design, and because they know that for the most part they're communicating to a TikTok generation of people. Um, so the expansion of the social media scrutiny to open phones, and I've seen this. I had a case where a guy came in on an H1, and it was a new H1. Got the visa stamp, and they put his phone on a black box and took him into secondary, and said, you've sent your resume out to these other employers. You've had these conversations with your friends on WhatsApp and Signal about looking for other work, other opportunities. We don't think you have the intent to work for the 3-year duration. 5-year ban, expedite removal. And one, it's like, well, where's the proof of the what you use to make that assessment, the algorithm's weights. And two, is there any opportunity here to make an argument about like what intent actually means? Because I thought in free markets is like, what does that mean? Like, if I'm looking for a job in the United States, like there's no such thing as 214N portability now because I can't look for another job. But the big problem that I see with, and the same thing with Project Firewall, is this outsourcing of analysis and then decision making to a convenient system. And just like we criticize people in private sector or just users of AI of just relying on the first bit of slop that it outputs. I'm worried about the government doing that because they're thinking, well, Palantir built this system, so it must be right.
There's a lot of different directions I want to sort of go in there. And we'll talk about the social media vetting for H's in a minute and also Project Firewall. But just back to your article on the retroactive screening announcement. I just wanted to, you did a great job of sort of breaking down the numbers a little bit here as well. And you list the 19 countries for folks who don't remember from the announcement back in June, who are now impacted by this. And then again, some of the largest populations that could be impacted by this as well. But really what I think sticks out in the memo and that isn't being talked about enough is the fact that there is no, and you highlight this, there is no end date like outlined in this memo, but there is also no timeline, right? It is not controversial at all to say that this is a reactionary policy. This is a let's announce the policy now, figure out the details later. Like, I'm sure anyone inside of the Trump administration would actually agree with that. They wouldn't claim that this is like a super well thought out plan yet, but that's not really within their ideology to care that much. At a ground level, how do you anticipate this playing out over the next 6 to 12 months? Like, are you expecting, when you talk to other immigration practitioners, your colleagues, your peers, to start getting a boatload of phone calls and consultations for people who have a pending green card, an approved green card, like are either in the final stages or moving on to their N400s, who all of a sudden now are being called back into a field office for an interview and they need an immigration lawyer to go with them? Like, how do you think, on the ground in reality, this current and I know it's somewhat speculation because the details are still slim as they typically are in the early days of these announcements, but like, where do you sort of see this going? What's your forecast for it?
Well, I guess it depends on, like you said, how much of this is theater and how
Yeah.
much of it is policy. And I think that feedback mechanism between theater and policy is something that the administration plays around with too. In other words, if people are uh, actually affected by this, and those people affected by it, resort to litigation, then maybe they will push forward or push back based on how the reaction is. But if there's no pushback because out of fear or resources or both, I could see them well, okay, well then we'll expand it a little bit more, and we'll expand it a little bit more. Oh, now we're pushing back. Okay, now maybe with litigation. And what's interesting is like with the travel ban, the Muslim travel ban of the first term, the impact of the family separation impact was nearly 10,000, families, and the population of people potentially affected here is dramatically larger, 400x larger. And um so, the theater goes both ways, and I think now my advice on that is that we in the private bar need to take this very seriously. I often tell my clients I don't always take the Trump administration literally, but I do always take them seriously.
Yeah.
And really aggressively pursuing and strategizing a litigation strategy here. Now, strategically, doing a litigation strategy en masse might not be a great idea because you're making that a policy. But if you do it on an individual basis discreetly, and it's not, ruffling peacock feathers of the theater part of it, then, and I don't like that I have to say this. I don't love that this doesn't sound right, that this is now, but, with EAD delay, mandamus cases in the past, that's how it was.
Yeah.
And so, but and it sucks, but justice does not happen in real time, and it's not free. So I think that figuring out a way to strategically fight this early on is really the best remedy for the uncertainty of it all.
It's a really good point. It's a catch-22, I think, for the practitioner community, because you can help your individual clients with mandamus or with other individual lawsuits on their specific cases. And there's obviously a lot of grounds with the backlogs. I mean, we track it at Lawfully. The backlogs are just growing in real time. What USCIS is reporting as processing times aren't actually the real processing times. In some cases, they're better. In some cases, they're worse. But in a lot of instances, like there are tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands under some categories that have the ability, right, to file a lawsuit to get their case to move forward and work with an immigration attorney like you to do that. I was talking with a former USCIS official the other day about this, and the real problem with that is that it only clogs the system more when that starts happening at scale, right? Because a bunch of individuals sue to get their cases to proceed forward, and then the backlogs that are already created by a policy, right, only increase for the folks who don't have that representation or that ability to move forward. And it just is it's a snowball that continues to get worse and worse. Okay, I want to pivot over to what you already alluded to a little bit here, which is the announcement from the State Department that they're expanding the social media screening and vetting for that they were doing for F1s and Js to H1B and H4 visa applicants as well. One of the things that's really frustrated me is that the State Department used to publish monthly visa issuance statistics by consulate. The last time they did that was May. So they haven't released any new data on visa issuances. They on the monthly reporting, they never told you how many people applied versus how many were approved. So you can never get what was the approval percentage of H-1B applicants at Chennai, for example. You can never know that. But if you looked at like the year over year numbers, May 2025 compared to 2024, you can kind of extrapolate okay, more are being issued. That some of that might be demand, some of that might be increased scrutiny, and there's more denials. You can sort of stitch together hearsay from practitioners and from foreign nationals and sort of to extrapolate from that. But we know that on the State Department side, its wait times have been increasing at consulates, and adding in this additional layer for one of the largest case types that are being applied for in India, China, Korea, some other, London, some key consulates, is only going to make that backlog and sort of those wait times even worse. But I wanted to dig in a little bit more into your concern on it, right? Which is uh, they have been maybe beta testing isn't the right word, but they've been doing this with F and J and M applicants. In the June memo that was leaked from the State Department, it was outlined as a manual process in that memo. But if they're scaling it up to this point, I think very rightly, like the assumption has to be what technology components are they layering into this process, as opposed to just a foreign service officer, a consular officer spending 30 minutes, scouring through an Instagram and a Facebook account using like a old school software to sort of do that. Like what does that process look like? And so that's something you've been thinking a lot about, right?
Yeah, and look, there's so many checkpoints in this process, because they could say, yeah, we're going to manually check at the State Department, and I have the guy got the visa, so I think that they did manually check at the State Department. They did an agentic check at the border, at the
Right.
airport, and part of this to me is like, okay, well, as long as there's an agentic analysis at some part, if I was in the government thinking this through, um, then then we're covering ourselves. And again, I think we talked about this offline, that clearly this is full scale at the enforcement uh, level, and I think we're starting to see it at the investigation level, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit with Project Firewall.
Yep.
And so to me, I don't think it's very tinfoil hat to say that we're going to see this at the adjudication level when the infrastructure for those other things is already there. And it's also not just it's human agnostic. There are attorney generals in many states right now suing over the expansion of the save date for the driving record save database for immigration check to include U.S. citizens. So, immigration has always been the door, the to sneak in, to encroach on, the Constitution and just liberal humanism in general.
Yep.
And I think we're just seeing a really sophisticated iteration of that right now, um, with these systems coming together. And like they're hiding uh, cameras and in traffic cones, and was it NPR or Associated? I can't remember who did the investigation. And they're finding these cameras and detection systems more than 100 miles in the interior, and it's mass surveillance, mass traffic pattern predictive analytics on all drivers. It's not. And so the only way for this systems like Immigration OS that we'll talk about and others is the only way for these things to work is if for them to monitor all of us in order to analyze some of us. And then, so, the next president and the next ideology or the next crisis is going to create the next use case for this system. And I don't think we're really thinking about that.
Yeah, and like you mentioned right now, and we sort of transitioned to Project Firewall, right? Like they're starting these initiatives in very focused and defined areas first, but once the infrastructure is created, it can and it operates within government systems and within sort of a government infrastructure. It can be applied to different agencies and different focus areas as well. One area that's been, I think, for good reason, recently top of mind for a lot of immigration practitioners, and especially HR global mobility teams at employers, is Project Firewall. And Andrew Craybaum and Parker Portafoy from Bloomberg Law broke this story the other day, and then it was confirmed by the Secretary of Labor in the Trump cabinet meeting that DOL has pursued about 200 investigations under Project Firewall. I mentioned this the last time a couple of weeks ago when we did the news podcast, but I talked to a former DOL official and I asked them if 200 investigations into H-1B programs, like at any given time, was an out of the ordinary number in any administration. They said no. So take that for what it's worth, that these investigations could be routine investigations that have been happening regardless, or they could be new investigations. I think Andrew and Parker mentioned in their piece that at least one major investigation was signed off and sort of commissioned by the Secretary of Labor herself, which is sort of the difference with Project Firewall as compared to the previous infrastructure for H-1B program investigations. Is before a complaint had to be filed. For the most part, most investigations came from complaints that were filed, whereas now the Department of Labor is signaling that they are going to be more proactive with their investigations. On the data front, I've spent most of my career in the publicly available LCA data the Department of Labor puts out for anyone in the world to see. It is a big, messy data set, but there is a lot of data in there that the department itself, with resources or with new technology tools, could analyze and look for things that they consider to be potential red flags in terms of how employers are utilizing the H-1B program, or the beginning stages of the green card process to the prevailing wage determination and perm process as well. And Kevin, you wrote what is still to this day my favorite piece on Project Firewall, and you did a whole analysis of sort of what red flags DOL is most likely looking for. And I agree with all six that you lay out here, but more so from the perspective of if you're an employer or an immigration lawyer advising an employer, how you should be bolstering your compliance programs on this front in preparation for what the government is likely going to come and do. And then you also, and this is part of the larger topic that you're talking about, you outline a little bit the capability of DOL to really expand and throw gasoline on Project Firewall going forward, that maybe they wouldn't have had a few years ago. So I want to give you the floor to sort of outline this article in general, because I think it'll be especially helpful for the practitioners who are listening.
Yeah, so Project Firewall is really interesting to me, both as somebody who's following the AI surveillance stuff and someone who's been practicing for a long time. I've worked on DOL wage and hour investigation cases representing employers in back wage and public access file compliance things. I've represented employees in filing back wage complaints to wage and hour. And everything, trying, again, this theme of parsing theater from politics, from policy, is, everything here is basically what wage and hour does already.
Yeah, right.
And is this okay? So is this just like a new SWAT team, or is this just a rebrand? And now, and I don't mean to, say that not to take it seriously. I'm wondering how much to take it literally. Now, the one part that I think literally is happening is the integration, the more between different government and state government and social media type systems for things like, and the flags here that I mentioned in the article. But the one practical one that I think pops out most to me is number 3, with the work location in our post-COVID and internet connected and Zoom and podcast connected world. Clients, people just have this, well, where are you working? Well, I work remotely. Like, okay, but your conscious is not uploaded to the matrix though. Like, where's your body? Because these rules were made in the 90s when where your bodies and minds worked in the same place for the most part, and we've decoupled where bodies are and where minds work, but we haven't changed the rules about it. And oh well, I moved to here for this great apartment, and I didn't tell my employer because who cares? And there's tax implications there and immigration implications that are just so. This is just digital dust that's way easier to collect.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, it's a wage issue. If there's a back wage gap, and there's a market reality. It's funny. Like I'm not getting paid by each time I say AI. It's just that there's a market squeeze with AI that's affecting H1 jobs. There's a government AI driven scrutiny that's making it harder. So it's the candle's burning at both ends. So, the wage data or the wage, sometimes people are benched and with or without pay or shortened pay. And, there's a market reality, and then there's immigration compliance, and then the employer thinks I'm doing them a favor. And usually, or not usually, a lot of times practitioners hear about this after the fact. We're told about, the car has already crashed into the tree, and they're like, how can I make sure I don't crash into the tree? And I guess this is kind of segue into like, well, what should people be doing is, compliance, immigration compliance. If you're participating as an employer in these benefits or working with a company participating in these benefits, that you need to make sure that they are, and you are robust in your compliance files, auditing the files, and maintaining a tickler system for I-9 compliance and keeping those files separate. These are things that companies need to do right now. So, the obvious thing is comply with the rules, and how do and know what the rules are. So the wage and not benching, but maintenance of public access file, usually if you're lucky, you think about your public access files as much as I think about my taxes. And, and that means you should outsource it the same way, unless you want to think about this all the time. And maybe some people have HR teams to do that. And as far as like right now, I would say somebody should proactively internally do an audit of your files, because that's the optics of diligence there can potentially help. Because you don't want to react. You want to be proactive, and this is the best way that you could be proactive right now. And if you find problems, there are ways to fix them and mitigate the potential liability. Maybe not always eliminate, but certainly mitigate. And then a lot of these things are discretionary. And then just like when you get pulled over by the police, if you're pleasant and if you're organized and the optics might be a different thing with discretion on giving you a warning than a ticket, than if you're unorganized and driving recklessly and have a different kind of perception for the officer. So yeah, I think the audit is the critical thing here. I'm not sure how much of this is real expansion, like you said, versus testing of new systems, maybe, and maybe a little bit of theater blended in. So I take it seriously. I'm not sure how literal I take the thing about the secretary signing off. Like, okay, like does that? I don't know if that means anything, but I could see how the theater of it could be meaningful.
The secretary is a political appointee, and I worry for, again, if I'm remembering correctly, and I'll have to go back and look, and maybe I'll edit this out if I'm wrong, but I think that in Andrew's piece, they said that they confirmed that at least one major investigation was signed off and commissioned basically by the secretary herself. That's jives with what I've been hearing behind the scenes for a long time. That
Yeah.
sure, Project Firewall is an all encompassing, right? Like everybody is now more at risk of an audit than they were before. Like that is true. How much more at risk? 2% more, 20% more, 200% more. That I think is still unknown. But politically, there's a lot of pressure, and this goes with number 4, which you've talked about too. Companies that have recently done layoffs of anyone, but layoffs of American workers who also have large foreign national sponsorship programs. The Department of Labor is looking to make a big splash with at least one of those, if not more, probably by the end of the year, but not necessarily. It might be a New Year thing, but that's the announcement that I'm looking for. And you mentioned that because there are a lot of companies who this year have done sometimes large and some, again, not that we're getting paid to say AI, but as a result of AI, this has been either said publicly or has been leaked by former or current employees from these companies that layoffs of workers have been done, and that is a potential red flag that you lay out for companies that could be targeted by investigations. And then the other one that maybe we'll just group into that question as well is number 5. Your job duties don't match your H-1B petition. Boy, that's a gray area one, isn't it? As you know, as a practitioner, and I know as a former paralegal, like that's a even more difficult in the age of AI to match job duties to the reality of an actual job in real time on a 3-year petition when things change a lot. And when an amendment should be filed versus when it's okay is another gray area that most HR and global mobility teams aren't, I think because they haven't had to for the last decade, aren't thinking as critically about that for their entire population as they were before, but maybe should be now. So
Yeah.
just get a reaction on both of those, maybe.
No, that totally makes sense, and I agree with that. And in practice, I think where we see that manifest, and also ties into some of these others, is the working at an end client location
Yeah.
for the H-1 workers. And so there was a change. There was an expansion of what the word employer means for H-1 purposes. It's almost like the government did a judo, employer only means this. Okay, fine. Employer means all of this.
Yeah.
After and now the client's requirements can potentially be considered as, controlling for determining the requirements for the petition. And what is market reality sometimes that a worker is placed at a client, and the client knows, whoever they're talking to knows like a market reality of what is preferred to do a position like this, but not the employer's minimum requirements to do this job competently. Like immigration is so counterintuitive to market if you think about it. Like whenever I do a perm or H1, and the job requires 10 years and a PhD. Okay, let's talk about this. Oh, that's a preference. Okay, so now we need to, what is minimum to do this job competently? That's what I'm looking for. And that disconnect in understanding is now translating into revoked, denied petitions. And so the solution there is that there has to be complete information sharing and consistency across the board, which practically sometimes is difficult to do, not just because maybe the employer doesn't have direct access to the client people, but maybe the person at the client that CIS or talked to just gave a wrong answer.
Yeah.
And so or just gave what their experience is. So that I think is a more practical use case that we're going to see thread a lot of this stuff. And let's be honest, the client offsite client work is a target area for USCIS, which that's bipartisan. That is not our first employer employee memo came out with Obama, so this is
Sure.
not a hugely MAGA thing, but it is MAGA scaled. So.
And I wanted to just flash, this is from my newsletter a month and a half ago now, but it's the latest LCA data we have. So the Department of Labor's LCA data through June, April through June of 2025, 20% of the approved LCAs had a secondary entity listed in them. And then 56% had multiple work sites. So for multiple work sites, especially in the era of remote work, and a lot of those is remote work, a lot of those are home offices too. That is a big, it's the majority of employers are leveraging that in the LCA, and ultimately in the applications, H-1B applications paired with that gets filed with the USCIS. And then the secondary entity is a fifth of the market, if not more, depending on if you look at any sort of individual quarter. Last thing on this topic that I want to pick your brain on, because I know there's a lot of folks who will be listening who have never themselves gone through a DOL audit or an investigation. You mentioned before that this is something that you've aided clients with in the past. One of the things we were talking about offline before we started recording is like what happened historically matters significantly less, right, than it used to when it comes to the immigration space. But I still think it's probably helpful if you could maybe just outline what those investigations look like in practice. Who are the individuals from the government who are the points of contact who are requesting certain types of information, and what does the timeline look like? Maybe just like if you could tell a quick story as an example, that I think that would be really helpful for folks who are listening and who haven't experienced it before.
Yeah. So, well, I can say that the cases that I've worked on representing employer side were all 100% whistleblower driven.
Mm.
And I've heard of random. I've never worked on one, but and I've seen statistics from a decade ago of like 20 to 30% would be random. That's not been my personal experience. I think it's lower than that, but um, and so in those investigations, so first there's they start with the investigation, collect everything, enter our appearance, ask to for time to go through and see what the damage is, because that was these are usually the reactive ones, and then do the negotiations and good faith attempts to comply. uh we had one that went to before an ALJ, and there was a DOL solicitor on the other side, and it was quasi judicial,
Yeah.
and that was 2 years of you know and and in that case, we saved him. Maybe it was a six-figure thing that we saved him, and but we charged tens of thousands of dollars for it.
Yeah.
And I a fraction of that as an audit beforehand would have, so a lot of this definitely feels like, if you don't go to the dentist long enough, you're going to have way more root canals and
Yeah.
pain than if
Yeah.
you do your preventative daily, maintenance, or monthly or whatever it is, maintenance.
Yeah.
And now another thing, because I'm not just team employer or team employee. I'm team immigration. I want to make this, it needs to make sense for everyone. And on the employee side, there are people who are benched, and they know it, and they know that there's a problem and they're not getting paid. And I'm like, well, you should file a complaint with Wage and Hour. Well, I'm not going to do that. Project Firewall, and Trump says kick them all out and a 100K fee. And my knowledge and your insight here would be great. I haven't heard of any kind of like whistleblower retaliation. I feel like that would be like really asinine. But if they're shifting to pure secretary investigation approved and driven cases, then maybe that is a valid concern. But I've had people who are, their wages are short, they're benched, and they want to file change of status or something, and I'm like, you need to be able to describe this in a way that, that you look like the victim here and not just an accomplice to it. But I understand the stress of like wanting not want, and it's not about the money for them usually. It's just about like documenting how it's not their fault.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen anything about like retaliation like that, but I imagine part of it is just like you said, the sheer fear probably of filing these, like with the asylum thing, or the border stuff. The optics goes both ways. Biden gets elected, and a bunch of people start lining up and showing up at the border because there's a perception that there's going to be something one way. And then
Mhm.
Trump gets elected, and people stop showing. It's not like anything's changed yet, but it was like, it's like it went from like a Taylor Swift concert to somebody you don't like, and the demand went down before any policy rolled out. So they're looking at that data too, and I think they understand how much theater influences policy without having to deploy actual policy.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point. I wish I had more insight to share on it, like about how the Trump administration would treat whistleblowers who are foreign nationals. I have never heard of retribution in the past. I will
Yeah.
say that I do know that the uh, metaphorical and literal telephones are a lot more open and manned at DOL for U.S. workers who feel that
Yeah.
they are being unfairly treated due to employers misusing the H-1B program or the PERM program, and that there are a lot more calls being taken from complaints from U.S. workers than there have been in the past.
I'm
Um,
hoping they see the derivative impact to them by underpaying H1 workers, because that was the whole point of that. To protect US workers, we got
yeah,
to make sure that they're not doing this to these H workers to create a market for underpay and depressed wages.
yeah.
So I hope they still see it ultimately that way.
Yeah, and the question is, what does that incentivize? This is sort of the question for the entire next 3 years in the employment-based immigration space is at the executive level, how are employers going to pivot their H programs. They could, like you said, do a hyper focus on compliance, make sure that everything, every I is dotted, every T is crossed, everything is above board. And if an audit came, they'd ace it with flying colors, and then do the early maintenance investment in that. And I know that there are some programs that have been doing that and have been taking it very seriously. But I'm looking at it right now. Stuart Anderson from Forbes just came out with an article, with some, I think, anonymous quotes from folks about a lot of companies that aren't as prepared and are more exposed to what in the past would have been, a very forgivable, non-malicious compliance violation with the H-1B program that could end up costing you a lot of money, could cost you employees, and could cost you the ability to hire employees in the future, and have a real negative impact on your company as a whole, not just your sponsorship program. And what employers do in reaction to this new environment that's been created is still pretty foggy, is, I think, yet to be seen. We'll find out a lot more in the next 6 months with the rollout of the weighted lottery, because that's going to expose a lot of cracks, I think. But yeah, employers could pull back, as we've seen some publicly announce, on sponsoring H-1B employees and other foreign nationals. And other employers might go the opposite route, which is, we're just going to make sure we do everything to the level that we think the Trump administration expects us to, because again, they're always a little bit, they're always the administration. This isn't just Trump administration. It's every administration, the immigration leadership regime. They can sometimes be a little bit sparse on the details of what they expect in terms of their new interpretation of existing regulations or existing norms going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because like I remind myself that the laws really have not changed much
Yeah.
since the 90s, but geez, man, the policies are on a swing. And yeah, like I remember when the shift from Bush to Obama was very employer-centric crackdown, because the Bush thing was let's round up all the undocumented workers, and then
Yeah.
Obama comes in. No, let's gut check these employers.
Yeah.
And that's where most of my compliance and representation cases came from, that time period. And so I can see a more nuanced shift. And we were talking about this earlier. It's not just against all employers. It's the ones that are the non-FANGs, the non-Fortune 550s, maybe that get hit with this more, and also happen to be the ones maybe with the less resources to fight or even just audit in a robust way, maybe. So yeah, there's a big separation of who's eligible for the benefits on the petitioner side, I think, also because of that. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, like who's going to be targeted, if anyone in particular. But one thing I did want to mention is, in the past, those who really had struggled with compliance and did not score well with, like, FDNS, for example,
Sure.
soon got a visit from ICE on I-9s. And back then we talked about, they got MOUs, memorandum of understanding. I think that the integration between them is much deeper
Yeah.
technologically, and the potential for scaled scrutiny in these different compliance areas, because I-9 is not just foreign workers, it's everybody. And
Yeah.
the violations, they can calculate $1,000 per violation. So like every line on the I-9 is like, oh, you did this wrong, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. So next one, 1,000, 2,000, 3. So the game that how it used to be, and I don't know if that's still going to be the case, but the ICE will give this this penalty, and then you take it to, was it Okaho, and then they usually have it. So here's your $100,000 penalty, and then you file the suit, and then you come back with 50, and it just felt like part of a game.
Yeah.
And so I'm just saying, these are things that have happened in the past. Some of the stuff that we're talking about are tricks from MAGA 1.0 and other administrations, but now scaled to the power of a radical ideology and some even more radical technology.
Yeah. Well, let's end on that because this was not a headline, but I think it was one of the first articles of yours that I read that I found super, super fascinating, and I wanted to sort of, and you've talked about this threaded into the headlines that we have talked about so far. But Immigration OS and what ICE is currently the technology that ICE is currently using in public-private partnership with technology companies, and the infrastructure that it's building and sort of the capabilities that it's creating and how that can be expanded across the entire immigration system going forward. I'll link this article that you wrote from back in October in the show notes, and I highly recommend folks go and read it. But maybe just to sort of wrap up this this podcast, you can just give sort of your final thoughts on what the Trump administration in public-private partnership is creating in terms of immigration technology that can enact policies that it's had since the first administration at a scale that wasn't previously possible.
Yeah. When I first heard about Immigration OS, I thought I was reading a sci-fi, novel. I heard about it in around July, I think is the first time. And so the system that ICE was mainly using before that, ICM, investigative case management, also Palantir built, but Immigration OS is the first system to actively deploy multiple large language models, ChatGPT, the one everybody probably knows, Gemini, and Claude, the one that everyone should fear. And it's so and as I said in the article, a DHS official said, this does not just collect data, it structures what agents do with it. That quote, that entire life cycle from identification to removal is built into the software. And Todd Lyons referred to it as like Amazon Prime, but with human beings. Speed, efficiency, and automation process people like packages. That is, I mean, the unholy matrimony between Silicon Valley technology and MAGA ideology is, to me, no more apparent than in that statement. And the concern is, like when the Snowden thing happened and we learned about surveillance at scale there, it was scary that they were monitoring us, but that they were humans and the analysis was human. And the scale was to the scale of what humans could do, which was scary back then. It was chilling. And now, so Stephen Hubbard, a data scientist at AIC, which I quoted in the article, said, in the past, AI tools were primarily used to support efficiency, flagging a case for review, human review, right? But the new systems appear to be more prescriptive, guiding agents on what actions to take rather than simply supporting their decision making. And that was the experience that my client got at the CBP with the black box check. And so, who's making the ultimate decision and who's making the ultimate analysis before the decision? How much of human analysis is being augmented? How much of it is being replaced? Is what I'm worried about with Immigration OS. There's a huge conflict of interest. So I think most practitioners and people know the White House Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, who was very much the architect of the travel ban in Trump 1 and probably this one as well, has a huge documented financial interest in Palantir stock, some six-figure amount that ranges somewhere between $100,000 and $250,000. And Palantir's gotten nearly $1 billion of government contracts in this term, like in the last year. The stock is up 80%. And I mean, I don't care if Nancy Pelosi does it or Stephen Miller does it. It's so obvious, and it just seems like nobody cares. And he claims he's recusing himself on anything related to this, but everything immigration is related to this. I don't know how that's even like possible. And the really scary thing, like when the Snowden stuff came out, there were hearings. Congress got involved. They created a FISA court. There was some attempt at checks and balances. And like you said, who talks about Congress anymore, right? Well, here's another reason why. Senator Wyden and AOC both sent a detailed letter asking for answers about Immigration OS, and you know they're not getting answers. And you know this is new. This is just happening now. But I don't think this is really on anybody's radar that it's happening. That private algorithms are being used to create human consequences on behalf of a government. Some of those systems are deploying things that are clearly a violation of the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment. And the and my theory is that some of the things that we've seen in the last year, like the NTAs being issued for those within the grace period, the way some of those happened just felt like the testing of an automated workflow than it was the deployment of a new policy. And I see things like, and I wrote something about this new EB1 NIW portal on the My USCIS website, not where all the online forms are, in a separate thing. And it's this beautiful user interface that looks not beautiful, but like smart. Like to me, it looks like a Salesforce UI. And I'm like, government's never made anything that pretty before. And why does it say 12 megabyte limit structure? What's up with that? And the engineers that I talked to about this is like, that's to parse data, to chunk it. And okay, so for who or for what is going to be doing that analysis? And I think the immigration bar is really in the Stone Age with AI use cases, and USCIS is in Star Trek world. And one example that I gave to you that I think maybe will help people when we were talking offline, that I think will help people illustrate this, is that an API call. So Google Scholar, I think people who do NIW and EB1 cases are familiar with Google Scholar to find citations and H-index and publications and things. There's what's called an API call, an application program interface type of thing, that you can access the data in Google Scholar. But you could also deploy an agentic system to do an analysis of their work, and also to strategically come up with a list of people who can provide letters of recommendation based on their citation of the work. And this is something that I deploy in my work to help my clients. And if I can do that, well, I know Palantir knows about the SERP API call to analyze Google Scholar, and they probably know a bunch of other things to analyze it in a more nuanced way than I know. And so to me, the writing is on the wall. With all the technology exists, the infrastructure is being built, there are use cases being deployed, and the natural extension of it, and we see evidence of the encroachment into U.S. citizen tracking, into CBP Border Patrol coming, more than 100 miles into the interior, of people losing their visas for protected speech. And each of these are, and when I look at this marriage between like a Palantir and a MAGA, are these just case studies for something bigger that's going to be happening, that they're already capable of doing because of the speed of the computation and innovation, but are rolling out in this way that psychologically will be palatable for us. Because if they started in mass getting rid of all the NTA everybody, and doing it, that I think even the most MAGA supporting person would be like, this is a little Orwellian, right? But if you spoon feed the Orwellianism, and it just slowly, or not slowly, it just quickly becomes a new normal. And because people are not enraged about this, it's just going to be a continue. That also reminds me of a Silicon Valley thing: better to ask for forgiveness than permission, right? How many times does Zuckerberg go before Congress to ask for forgiveness than permission?
Yeah, and I think that is the crux of it, is that it's a very potent and relevant topic to the immigration community, both practitioners and individual foreign nationals, applicants themselves, and companies, nonprofits, anyone who is the beneficiary of the U.S. immigration system. But it's transcendent from that, and it's so big that with the flood of uh, other big things that are impacting the practitioner and foreign national community right now in this moment, it's like drinking from a fire hose is sort of the metaphor that keeps coming up in this administration. Is it's very difficult to keep up with all of it. But I'm really glad you've been writing about it. I'm glad that you broke it down here, and I'm glad that it's a story that you're going to be continuing to follow and sharing your findings on, because I think it's going to be very, very beneficial for the entire immigration community to continue to follow your work. So, Kevin, with that, this has been a really awesome discussion. Thanks to the listeners who, I know this is a little bit of a longer podcast for the news recap, but if you're still here with us an hour in, you're lucky. You got some great information from Kevin on that front. Before we wrap up here, Kevin, though, tell folks who are listening if they're interested in getting in touch with you or working with you, what the best place to do so is.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate this platform and opportunity to talk about this stuff. I think it's super important. I can be reached so anyone can email me, kevin.andrews@kevinjandrewslaw.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Kevin J. Andrews, and my website is kevinjandrewslaw.com.
And we'll make it easy for those who are listening or those watching on YouTube. If you just go to the description, you'll see all those links at the very top. And then the links to Kevin's newsletter on LinkedIn, a couple of the articles that we referenced today. Highly recommend you go and read those. They're well worth it and very well organized and easy to digest, even though the topics that they're covering are very, very complex. So with that, Kevin, thanks so much. We're going to have you back on again soon, because we could keep going for hours on some of these topics. And there'll certainly be some new ones that pop up and new information that comes to the surface in the next few months. So we'll have you on again soon. But until then, I hope you have a awesome holiday season. Hope everything goes well with your clients, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Finn. You too. Appreciate it.